In the almost 100-year history of the Torrance Police Department, 4 officers have lost their lives in the line of duty. Although that number is low in comparison to other agencies in Southern California, it's still 4 officers too many for the city of Torrance. I'm Emmett Miller, and I'm here to bring you the personal stories of these 4 members of the Torrance Police Department. These stories are told through the words of family and friends in hopes that you have a better understanding of who these people were. Not only were they police officers, they were fathers, brothers, and sons who left behind family and friends whose lives were forever changed after their untimely deaths. Today, when law enforcement officers throughout the country are facing immense scrutiny, these stories will undoubtedly remind us of the sacrifice made by these fallen officers who gave their lives doing a job they loved. In October 1949, William Robert Lewis, or Bob, as he was affectionately called, joined the Torrance Police Department. A Torrance native, graduate of Narbonne High, and a former United States Marine, Bob was also an accomplished motorcycle rider and a member of the world champion stunt and drill team known as the Victor McLaughlin Motor Corps. In 1954, Bob and his partner Dave Cook reintroduced the motor program to the Torrance Police Department after a 14-year absence. In 1957, Bob was promoted to sergeant of the motor detail. What a lot of people don't know is that Bob played the trumpet, and given his Marine Corps background, he was big on uniform appearance and looking sharp.
My name is Pat Hunt. I'm the oldest daughter of W.R. Lewis, sergeant of the Torrance Police Department, who was killed in 1959.
I'm Lorraine Davis. I'm the youngest daughter of William Robert Lewis.
And my father, he was a really good police officer. Everything was, you did everything by the book. He loved his job, what can I say? He loved being a motorcycle officer. Everything had to be perfect. His uniform had to be perfect, and when he got more officers, everything had to be perfect.
I remember him as a child always making sure his brass buttons shined and his boots shined, and I can still see where he was standing there in the kitchen just shining all of that, and he did not go to work disheveled. He went to work with pride. I just remember my dad as just being a man that was proud of being a policeman. He did have respect from the young people at that time for just, you know, right was right and wrong was wrong.
My brother was always speeding, and the police officers would see him go by and they'd say, "There goes Bob Lewis's kid again, speeding." And they'd turn their head, and of course my dad would hear about it. So I'm sure that he was speeding, and my dad saw him, and my dad went after him and gave him a ticket, just like he would anybody else. My dad didn't turn his head for anybody. Right was right and wrong was wrong, and I mean, us kids didn't get away with anything.
On August 23, 1959, Bob and his partner, Officer Donald Lemaster, left the police station traveling south on Hawthorne Boulevard. As they approached the intersection at Carson Street, a vehicle pulled in their path.
You could hear the sirens just up and down the boulevard, up and down. I thought it was Torrance Boulevard where they were going up and down, and I was sitting in the little room there sewing right off the porch, and Mom just went out on the porch and she said, "Your dad's been in an accident." She just knew it. She just had a gut feeling. She just sensed it.
He was a very gruff man, and I remember tears rolling down his eyes when I graduated. And then I lost him right after that. That was hard. And I miss him.
When Dad died, it just changed all of our lives. It was very hard. It was, I was just 2 weeks before I went into high school, and it's just, my world was shattered. 2 weeks before the accident was my brother's wedding, and I have a picture of my mom and dad, and they just looked so happy, and it was a great time. It was just to go back and look at that picture and just know what a fun day it was, and everyone was happy, and nobody would have known that day that 2 weeks later he would be gone.
In a statement later made by Officer LeMaster, he talked to the incident and Bob Lewis's final act of selflessness. LeMaster proclaimed that in the moments prior to impact, Sergeant Lewis yelled for him to go around the vehicle, leaving himself no other option but a collision. Many people will ask why Sergeant Bob Lewis made that selfless act. Was it the Marine in him? Was it the leader in him? Or perhaps a testament to the kind of guy he was? Bob Lewis was laid to rest at Green Hills Memorial Cemetery. Knoll Siebert was born in Long Beach, California. Although Long Beach was his home, Dave spent a lot of his early years with family in Kernville. Dave always brought smiles to family, who described him as a favorite at family gatherings. A graduate of Bellflower High School, Dave eventually obtained a degree from Long Beach State University. When hired in 1965, he was one of the first on the Torrance Police Department with a college degree.
I met Dave when I was 15, the summer before I moved to Kernville, and we went to high school together. He was a popular guy. He was happy. He knew what he wanted.
He married my niece, Christine, and they lived up there in the Kern River area as high school students. And he came down and lived in Gardena, Torrance area, where the majority of our family lived. And he wanted to be a cop. And he talked to me about it, and he was too young.
He wanted to be a policeman for quite a number of years. He went to school for it. He did everything he could to achieve that goal.
We had developed an internship program at our department. Pretty sharp kid. And so he was an intern for, I don't know, a couple years, and then he got to be old enough, to get on the job, and sent him off to the academy and came back as a regular beat cop.
As they started their lives together, settling in the South Bay, Dave and Christine were in the final stages of adopting a child. These plans would be cut short, as Dave was killed just several months before the adoption was to be final.
We were to the point in our marriage that we wanted to have children. He had met his goal of becoming a police officer, and I had not gotten pregnant, so we put in for adoption.
August 10th, 1967, approximately 8:45 in the morning, Officer Siebert responds to an alarm call at the Foods Company Market at the intersection of Artesia and Crenshaw. A location known for false alarms, this day would be different. Unbeknownst to him, a robbery was in fact in progress. A violent career criminal and a drug addict by the name of Jerry Lee O'Brien was holding a manager and a cashier at gunpoint in a back office. Store manager Bruce Jessel recalls the day very well.
By the time we opened the door, he had the gun out and he was using force to push us, or push me into the office.
After obtaining a large amount of cash, O'Brien flees the office, not knowing a silent alarm had been tripped. As O'Brien leaves the office, Officer Siebert is entering the store. As Officer Siebert walks toward a cashier, he's unaware O'Brien is hiding behind a check stand, lying in wait for him.
Jerry Lee O'Brien had ducked down behind a check stand, and Dave walked up to that check stand with his gun holstered. And when he got to the check stand, Jerry stood up and fired one round into his chest.
Officer Siebert returns fire as he attempts to find cover in a nearby aisle. By all accounts, that should have been it. O'Brien could have escaped, but he chose to walk into the aisle where Officer Siebert was now lying wounded.
And Dave, at that time, Officer Siebert pulled his gun and fired a wild shot, and then staggered from the check stand area down an aisle towards the back of the store. And according to the witness at that point, she observed Jerry O'Brien walk down towards Dave Siebert in the aisle away from the escape route, which would have been in front of the store at that time, and fire another round into him while he was laying on the floor dying.
So I remember the day when Officer Siebert was killed. I was about 10 years old, and I was with my mom and my sister, and we had gone to the grocery store to go shopping, but we got there early, and the store wasn't open. So we were waiting there for it to open, and someone from inside the store, either a manager or one of the box boys or someone, came out of the front of the store and said, "Get out of here, this place is being robbed." So my mom and my sister and I, we started running out towards the parking lot, towards the cars, and as we were running, I could hear the gunshots going off.
As O'Brien flees, he encounters a store employee, Jerry Canfield. Canfield is standing next to Siebert's police vehicle. O'Brien sees Canfield, aims at him, and begins firing. Canfield enters Officer Siebert's vehicle and calls for help on the police radio. Canfield narrowly escapes injury as O'Brien runs from the store.
I went in the market. I remember Dave Siebert was lying on the floor of the market right near the checkout stand where he'd been shot. Sergeant Don Flaherty was also on the scene. He was on duty, and Sergeant Flaherty and I both lifted Dave Siebert onto the gurney.
After a short time later, they started bringing the Officer Siebert out, and he was still alive. I could hear him groaning. I remember that.
He was still alive, but obviously near death. And we rolled the gurney out to the ambulance. They put him in the ambulance and rushed him to Harbor General Hospital.
Dropped everything and rushed to Harbor General Hospital. And Dave was in on a table there with half a dozen doctors around him, trying to get him stabilized enough to where they could get him upstairs.
Not too long after that, I was in one of the marked units, or one of the units, and over the radio, I recall the broadcast from our station that the incident was now a 187.
After a 2-week manhunt, O'Brien was located and arrested in Utah. Dave had only been with the department for 2 years. Dave Siebert was laid to rest at Inglewood Park Cemetery. Gary Elton Ripstine was born in Downey, California. A Torrance High graduate and a member of the Army National Guard, he joined the Torrance Police Department in 1962. An ordained minister, Gary became the department's first police chaplain and found his calling for his overwhelming desire to help people. After being assigned to the Detective Bureau, Gary was assigned to the auto theft detail, where he was investigating a case of an airplane theft from the Torrance airport. Gary was able to identify a possible suspect by the name of Theodore Xanthus.
Gary is my younger brother, my only brother. He was about 2 years younger than me. We both grew up in the Downey area and then also moved out to Beaumont, California, then back to Torrance in 1948.
Gary was the kind of person that other people should aspire to be, myself included. He's the kind of a guy that in every individual he thought there was an element of good.
So I'm assuming it's because of his missionary experience. He was given and offered the opportunity to become the very first chaplain for the City of Torrance Police Department.
He was an ordained Mormon minister, and he used that to his advantage a great deal, especially when he was interviewing people.
December 21st, 1968. Gary was spending a Saturday afternoon with his kids at home when he received a phone call from the police station. He was advised that a tip had come in as to the whereabouts of the suspect in his investigation. Being the dedicated detective that he was, Gary left his kids with a neighbor and responded to the station to meet his partner, Bob Holmes. The investigation took Holmes and Ripstine to the suspect's home in Hermosa Beach.
They found the apartment, knocked on the door. When they made entry into the apartment, Bob Holmes took Xanthus's wife aside and started talking to her. Gary just walked a short distance into a bedroom where Ted Xanthus was on a bed.
Gary confronted the suspect in a bedroom and was immediately shot. His partner returned fire, injuring the suspect. Hermosa police officer Jack Carroll, who was off duty at the time, heard the call for help and responded.
The call came out of a shooting involving a police officer at 8th Street in Ardmore. As we stopped and ran up to the front porch, we were met by Detective Holmes, who told us that his partner was in the house and was shot, and that Holmes, had shot the suspect. Detective Holmes moved the body of his partner out of the way to another part of the house.
He entered the room where Gary had fallen and engaged the suspect and delivered a fatal shot.
I stepped in around the wall where Xanthus was laying, and I noticed he was grappling for a gun laying on the floor over his right shoulder. And as he reached for the gun, I finally, in self-defense, had to shoot him. And I did. And that was it.
A major shock to our family, and to his family as well, since he had wife and 3 little children at home. His son was about 4 years old. His older daughter was 2, and the younger daughter was 1. So they really did not get to know their dad.
I was very upset. I know that Detective Ripstine passed away, and I took it quite hard, not just because a police officer got shot, but because I was told sometime along the way that he was married and had children.
He decided he'd stay home that day and watch the kids while I took the time to go get a few presents for the kids for Christmas. And his mother went with me, and we went and got the presents and came back, and when we came to the door, there was a note on there saying to call the police department.
I just was in total shock, because it just didn't seem possible that it could happen to him.
It was hard. It was very hard to go home and know that he was not coming home again.
I was 4 years old at the time he was killed. I don't remember my dad very well.
She kept his stuff in a cedar chest. We knew where it was, and so we would sneak down there for hours and open it when everybody was gone and go through the stuff just to kind of...
Had his uniform in it and his book, his notes that he would take as when he was an officer.
So we could see his handwriting.
Yeah, and it had his Army uniforms in there.
I remember going to Torrance Police Department, and I remember walking in the door, and I don't think it was the one that they're at now. It was previous. My grandpa Ripstine took me there, and I remember walking in the door and seeing my dad's picture up on the wall. And that mattered to me. That made a big difference to me. It made me feel like, okay, I know where I belong. I know who I am. I'm the son of that man there who made a great sacrifice for this community here.
He loved being the chaplain. He loved to talk to people. He loved to help. In fact, he told me that that's why he wanted to be a policeman, because he wanted to help people.
It really kind of hit me when I was in 6th grade and we had to write our life stories.
Right.
And I went to Mom and I said, okay, tell me, and I think that was probably the first candid conversation I had with Mom about Dad. And it was, I remember lying in bed that night just bawling because it hit me that this was my dad and he'd been killed.
Very appreciative of what Torrance Police Department does with this memorial and with the connection that we have with them. I think it'd be pretty easy to forget, I guess, or to not put in the extra effort and time that I know Torrance Police Department does for us. And I'm very appreciative of them because through them and through the memorial that they have so faithfully pursued and done, I have a better understanding of my dad.
It's really cool to think that this person who has been so special to us is remembered and that there are people that appreciate his sacrifice, and you know, the sacrifice we made not knowing our dad.
Detective Gary Elton Ripstine paid the ultimate price and was laid to rest at Green Hills Memorial Cemetery. Born in New York, Thomas Joseph Keller spent much of his childhood in Orange County, California, until his family moved to Santa Barbara at the age of 10. From an early age, it became evident that Tom would dedicate his life to service. Tom, along with several close friends, became police explorers, and they dreamed of a career in law enforcement.
Tom and I first met each other in about the 4th grade in Goleta, California. We grew up together, going to 6th grade camp and spending summers, weekends, and days after school together. Joined the Explorers at Santa Barbara Sheriff's Office when we were about 13 years old, and fell in love with law enforcement.
Tom was always a good kid and a good boy, and very polite, and you know, he and his friend Scott, they were inseparable as they were kids.
Tom graduated from Dos Pueblos High School in Santa Barbara and soon joined the Marine Corps. Tom always wanted to be the best at everything. Even as a Marine, he earned a position with the coveted 8th and I at Marine Barracks in Washington, D.C. After his tour with the Marines, Tom joined the Torrance Police Department in 1982.
Tom and I immediately struck up a relationship because Tom was fresh out of the Marine Corps. He was a lot younger than me. I was 27 at the time. He was 21 or 22. But the service connection that we had, we immediately bonded.
Whenever he put his mind to doing something, whether it was you know, whether it was school or whether it was in the Marine Corps, in the academy, if he set his sights on a goal, and he would do that. He would carry it out and just see it through.
He loved being a patrol officer. At a time when community policing didn't exist, Tom was a community police officer. Heavily involved with the downtown area, Tom loved helping people and knowing his beat.
Tom Keller was the downtown cop. He was a 514 car, he was a 513 car that went into the Crest Bar, that shook hands with people, that took people out, that checked on things, that went up and talked to the manager and went up and talked to the owners.
He loved the city of Torrance. He really did. That was his city, and he was happy to be there.
As Tom's career was taking off, he would meet and fall in love with the woman he would eventually ask to marry him. They were engaged and were to be married in August 1986. Tragically, the wedding day would never come.
I wasn't scared about getting involved with a police officer because, like I said, I loved him, the man, and he just happened to be a Torrance police officer.
April 17th, 1986, officers responded to a report of a man with a gun at the Torrance Sporting Goods. At the time of the call, Tom's shift was over, yet he responded to assist fellow officers.
Torrance 514, clear your call, 510 at 5th. Man with a gun in front of the bike shop.
I was working with Bob Bowman, and we were eastbound Torrance Boulevard, stopped at a red light at Crenshaw, when we got a call of a man with a gun.
When Tom arrived with other officers, they observed the suspect armed with a rifle inside the store. With customers and employees fleeing for their lives, officers surrounded the building.
Leon Darley, who was wearing a Torrance PD raid jacket, approached the front of the store with a shotgun.
We parked west of the sporting goods store, and Bob and Tom took a position behind 2 parked cars that were in the center of the street when it had center parking. And I came along the sidewalk on the north side and got onto the west side of the sporting goods store where it's all brick.
I got the front cover with a shotgun. It's going to cover the alley to the rear.
Unit to cover the alley, be advised he has just grabbed a rifle. He's behind the counter.
The bad guy went back and grabbed the fully loaded M1 carbine with two 30-round clips taped together, jammed into the magazine well, pulled it off the rack, and shot off the first round into the ceiling, I guess to see if it was a real gun or not and if it really worked.
A short time later, gunfire exploded from within, and by all accounts, Tom was attempting to find better cover when he was shot.
One of the Torrance police officers put his hand up to us and said, "Hey, hang on right here, guys. I'm not sure what's going on. Somebody down the street fired off a couple rounds and we're still trying to figure it out." And no sooner did he get those words out of his mouth when just basically all hell broke loose with gunfire.
Shots fired, shots fired. Shots fired. He's running towards the back.
Shots started being fired from outside or from inside the store, and that's when we returned fire. Multiple gunshots from 4 different people.
There were so many rounds being fired that you could actually, see a cloud in the street from all the gunfire.
And then Bob yelled that we had an officer down, and I could see Bob pulling Tom into the store across the street.
Seeing his friend down and in trouble, Officer Bob Bowman left his position to cover, risking his own life to rescue Tom.
There was a cleaners there called Selma's Cleaners, and the window had just been shot out moments before, and Bob dragged Tom through the broken plate glass window.
And at that point I ran across the street and through Verb's bar and out the back door, down the alley and back into the store that Bob was. And Bob had just pulled Tom inside the store. And Tom was on the floor. And he was dead.
After several hours, Torrance Police SWAT officers entered the location and found the suspect dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
The passing of a friend is one thing. The violent taking of another human being is another thing. You put the two of them together, and it's devastating.
Contrary to what everybody says, it does not get easier. You just learn to live with it. Tom really was a wonderful son.
I was blessed to have the time that I did and the influence in my life that he provided.
The community support and everything was just unbelievable at the time for us. And that helped mend some of our wounds, I think, because we did have a great amount of support.
At the memorial service and at the funeral, both here and down in Torrance, the number of people that showed up. Friends of the family, people we didn't know. I just couldn't believe how many people were there to pay tribute and their last respects. It was very touching.
We're the last car, and we could see it had to be at least 2 miles of police cars with their lights on, and it was a great feeling to see that, the honor for Tom.
Tom was survived by his mother, father, sisters, brother, and fiancé. In a multi-agency funeral procession stretching from Torrance to Santa Barbara, Thomas Joseph Keller was laid to rest in Santa Barbara, California. The officers who died on those tragic days are not the only victims. Their families, friends, and colleagues are left to live with the pain of a love lost and a life cut short. So we honor them as well, for they are also our heroes. Policing is still the noblest of professions, and we will always honor and never forget our fallen.